All right. So on your calculator, when you turn it on, we've been hitting new, but if you're still working on number 1 and you don't want to have to do it again, then when you hit new 1 for new and it asks you, do you want to save? Say yes. Okay. And then you can title it whatever you want, like number 1 or whatever. Okay, because it's for you. And then once we finish with this example, I'll show you how to get back to it. Okay. So you don't have to save it. It's up to you if you want to just practice saving something so you know how to do it. Don't have to save them a lot, but it does help, I think, when we actually get to the exam and you have 2 calculator questions. You may need to move on to the second one because you're stuck on the first one and you don't have to go back and retype everything in. You can save them as FRQ1 and FRQ2 and everything will be fine. All right, so I'm not actually going to save mine, so I'm just going to escape out of that. All right, so then we do want to add, so now I'm going to say no. So we're going to add a calculator, and we're going to add a graph. Okay, everybody with me? And then for number 2, it says S of t is t squared minus sine of t. All right, so remember we can't use the t's, so x squared minus sine of x. All right, everybody okay with that? You get this thing that looks like a what? Parabola. It is, I mean, it's an x squared function. It does end up being a parabola, even though there's a sign in there. Okay, or it ends up looking like one. It's not a parabola. All right, so this is our function. Now, it does tell us we only want this when t is greater than or equal to 0. And then it specifically tells me this, so I can fix this. All right, we're going to fix our window, because if you don't do that when you get to number 3, when you start graphing number 3, you'll see how crazy the graphs look, which is all fine and great, but you don't want to have to look at all of that. So we only want our x values to go from 0 to 3. So I'm going to hit menu. I want to change my window, which is 4, and I want to do my window settings. Now, it says 0 to 3. There are times where even though I don't want anything less than 0, I might start at -1 just because I want to be able to see the axis. We'll decide if that matters to us or not here. But we go from 0 to 3. You can always go back and change it. And then I'm not sure what I want going on with y at this point, so we'll just leave it. And we got something like that. So this is one of those where, I can't really tell by the way it looks right there what's happening at 0. Like, is that at 0, 0? Is that a 0 I'm concerned with? So this is what I mean by this is one of those times where even though I'm only concerned from 0 to 3, I'd like to actually see what's happening at 0. So me personally, I would go back and change the window settings and actually start at -1 instead of at 0. I mean, you can do that every time if you want, whatever. And then I can kind of see that a little bit better. And that way I can also grab that 0 better if I need to see if it's really at 0, 0 or if it's not. Okay. But let's use our brains here too and not just the calculator. If I did substitute in 0 for t, this is 0 minus, what is the sign of 0? 0. So this 0, 0, it really is at the origin. So knowing that, I wouldn't have to actually go through and do that, but then I can see my function a little bit better, okay? So this is asking me for, says, where t is measured, so t is measured in seconds. That's important because our units have to be good here. S is measured in meters. We want to find the acceleration each time the velocity is 0, okay? So we have S of t. Now, this is not, I'm going to tell you to do some things that I do myself when I'm doing this. It's not like you have to do it on the AP exam or anything, but we put S of t in F1, so I'm going to label that for myself so I remember where things are, because sometimes in F1, it'll be position, sometimes it might be velocity, sometimes it might be acceleration, depending on the question, right? So then we're going to put the velocity function in F2, and we're going to put the acceleration function in F3, okay? So again, that's not actually part of my answer or anything. That's just me making some notes to myself so I can keep up with where everything is so I'm not doing the wrong thing somewhere, okay? So because I'm going to need velocity and acceleration clearly. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So I'm going to go back to my calculator, and I want to put in F2 the velocity. So I'm going to do tab so I can get back there, right? And what do I have to do to position to get velocity? Take the derivative. Okay, so I'm going to hit my little derivative menu here and choose that derivative there. I put x in there. And then when you put F1 in here, you have to make sure you do F1 of x so that you actually have an argument in there. And then we can hit enter. And then we can go ahead and get, well, we need to know when the velocity is 0 so that we can find the acceleration at that point, right? And so I don't really need to see the position graph. And if the less graphs you can see when you're trying to calculate things, the better. Because if we try to find a 0 right now, which we totally can without turning it off, the first thing it asks you is which function, and you have to make sure that you're paying attention to the questions. So again, me personally, I would just turn off the blue one. So if we hit tab to get back up there, you're going to arrow up to the blue one, and you just want to uncheck that so that all you have is the red. And once it's unchecked and gone, then you can just hit escape to get back there. Okay? Does that make sense? So we want to find, okay, and here's where writing this stuff down makes a difference. What I was told, it really matters here. We need to find when the velocity is 0. Well, the velocity that we have, v of t, is not defined here. The way we found v of t was by taking s prime of t, right? And we want that to equal to 0. Okay? So this, since it's a calculator question, we're basically saying we let the calculator find the derivative for us, the derivative of position, which is velocity. And so it equals 0 at t equals something. We'll figure out what that is. Okay. So let's go back over here. And I want to figure out when the velocity is 0. So how do we do that? Yeah. Menu, analyze graph, 0, right? Then I want to be to the left of it. Here's where it would say which function or something like that, where you'd have to choose it if there's more than one. But get on either side of it there, and there's this. Okay. Now, here's what I was saying yesterday. You know, the other day when it was such a disaster because I was trying to get you to get the little hand up there, which I don't know that I can even do. Can't. Maybe. Okay. So if you get the hand there, and I was telling you you need to grab it, you only need to grab it if you're moving it. But this is easier. Remember how we had a hard time like selecting it correctly and making it show up? If your hand is just over it, we're not going to get it to try to grab it, okay? But this is what makes it way easier. This is what I was trying to do, but since I couldn't do it up here, I was confused. Now you just, instead of control store, just hit variable, and what you want to do is you want to store it. We're going to store it. And I know it's T, but we're going to store it in C, and I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. You can store it wherever you want, but I'm going to tell you why I'm choosing C instead of T. And then I'm going to hit enter, okay? And so this is 0.4501, right? So then I'm going to say this equals 0.4501, now, which equals C. And I'm putting that for 2 reasons. 1, so I remember where it is in the calculator, and 2, so I can use it in the next step. Now, the reason I chose C instead of T is because T is part of the question, so it would make sense to store it in T. But we need to call it something, so we're expressing that this is some value that we have stored somewhere, and there doesn't need to be a period there. Okay, so really you could use anything. Storing it in A would be okay as well, except we're about to find A of T, and then that would be A of A, and then it would just be weird. Okay, you see what I'm saying with that? So then we need to find the acceleration. Okay, so I need my acceleration function in here. Acceleration is the derivative of what? Velocity. Okay, so I tried taking the derivative of F2, and it didn't like it. But not only is acceleration the derivative of velocity, it is the second derivative of position, right? Okay, so when we go over here, we're going to go back up to F3, so tab, and I'm in F3. So I do want the derivative. I'm going to hit this. But instead of the one that we've been choosing, you see the one right next to it? That is the one we want to choose. Hello. There you go. And then that's going to be the second derivative. Make sure I put an X here. What am I taking the second derivative of? F1, exactly. F1. F1 of X. Okay. All right, so everybody okay with all that? Now let's go back to the question. So what we're looking for, it says find the particle's acceleration each time the velocity is 0. Well, the velocity was only 0 once. Okay, if it was more than once, I'd have stored things in 2 different letters there. So that means now what I'm looking for is I am looking for a of t, which is the second derivative of position. Oh, hang on, dang it. It is a of t. It really went a of c. That's why. Sorry, I'm not trying to make it equal to 0. So I want a of c, which is equal to s double prime of c. By doing that, we're saying, okay, look, we stored this. I'm using my stored number. This is how you show that you've been doing those things, right? And then we just need to figure out what that is. Well, I'm reminding myself, I put the acceleration in F3. That is the value I want to take the acceleration of that I substitute in. So back in my calculator, I need to get to my calculate screen, right? That's how we just come up with values. And I want F3 of what? C. Because that's where we stored it. And remember, one of the reasons we write the number down, we want it written down there. But if you're like, I think I stored it in C. What did I do? Is that right? You can always hit C and hit enter, and then that shows you, you can double check that that's the number you had or whatever. So we get 2.4351. So this is 2.4351. Let's talk about units. And we'll talk more about units when we get into some other things with this, but we have taken, we had the position, which was in meters, right? Velocity would be meters per what? Second. And then, so these units are meters per second, and then these are meters per second, or meters per second squared, but meters per second is totally fine. Do you have to 100% understand what that means? No, and that's okay right now, but you have to understand how the units work, right? We good with that? What questions you got? Okay. Everybody okay? And again, I was told, not just putting V of t, but also kind of saying where you got V of t from, where we got A from, and whatnot. Okay? Yes, ma'am. In this instance, the answer is no, unless it tells you to justify somehow. There may be questions where you have to do some of these types of things, and then you have to explain because this one was positive and this one was negative. But that's not what this is. It's just asking you to do this. So the work that you show, remember, just because it's a calculator question doesn't mean you don't have to write down anything. You still have to write down some stuff, right? But you don't have to write down a ton or anything like that. Okay. All right. What questions we got? We good? Okay. All right, so if you haven't finished number 1, let's talk about how to get back there. So I feel like I don't necessarily need to save this one, right? We're done with that. So if I go back to my on key here, my little home, and what I want to do is I want to browse. So 2 for browse, and then I have a bunch more stuff than you do. You probably don't have that much, and even if you do, you can just arrow down until you find it, and then I'll just open FRQ2 here and hit enter. And then it's asking me, do I want to save what I just did? If you want to save it, great. But I don't want to save it, so I'm going to say no. And then you'll be right back where you were. Okay? What questions we got? All right.